What's up, my dudes? Now, in this video, I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the BlizzCon 2018 announcement as to the summer 2019 date release for Classic WoW, and of course the various changes and the things that of course they are not changing. And I ultimately wanted to delve into why I think Classic Vanilla WoW is timeless. So to start, while I didn't get a chance to play the demo, I've seen gameplay footage from channels like Naxxramas, Mad Season Show, and Preach Gaming, just to name a few. So keeping in mind that it's a demo, I'm actually very impressed. The health regeneration for your character might be too fast and stuff like that. Little things like that might be out of whack, but the developers, I'm confident, are going to fix that by the summer of 2019. So Blizzard is mostly keeping their word in regards to no game experience changes. There are, however, two changes that are still being debated since their announcement at the WoW BlizzCon panel. These are in regards to sharding and loot sharing. So if I were to give my opinion on the two, I would personally just say to not have either of them. Now, I see the arguments for both. I remember when Classic was first announced by J. Allen Brack, he was saying that Blizzard wanted to replicate the game experience, but not necessarily the launch experience. So sharding is kind of what I guess he meant in that regard. So sharding, of course, is where you have players in the same realm as you, same area, instanced apart from you. So they're taken to a duplicate of the zone. So you might see a player right next to you, someone maybe even that you're friends with in your server, just suddenly phase out of existence or disappear, and that's them moving on to that duplicate zone. The reasoning for this is, of course, to have the game run a little bit more smoothly so people don't lag as much, things of that nature. It makes a lot of sense, and plus it's also not a permanent change. Apparently it'll be present for maybe just like the first few weeks or something, but you know, for the hardcore players, a lot can happen in the first few weeks, so I don't know what they're going to do. I think also the sharding technology is going to be used just in the starting zones or something like that. But for loot sharing, this is a permanent change, and I can't say I'm a big fan of it either. The argument for it given by Ian Hazakostas this year was that back in the day, if someone had accidentally looted some gear that they didn't mean to, or even if they just ninja'd the gear, normally people would just post a ticket and then wait maybe a couple of days, and then eventually the problem would be resolved. And the reason they're having loot sharing as an option is to basically just bypass this process so they can deal with other issues. So at face value, this makes a lot of sense. It feels like the right decision, but the problem with it is that people can actually exploit this pretty easily. Like, let's say, for example, if you're in a group of 5 and you group up with 4 people that know each other, those 4 people could potentially roll for the same item, greed for it, need for it, whatever, and then whoever wins it in that pool, they'll trade it to the one who needs it the most in the end. And so they could exploit it in that fashion. And just for the matter that that wasn't part of Classic WoW, it kind of ruins it. I really hope they kind of second guess themselves on this one. It's just not a part of vanilla. Like, people got blacklisted from joining guilds and shit like that off of the fact that they would just ninja loot. It kind of gave more flavor to the game. Honestly, if you think about it, like, ninja looters will just be ninja looters, so anyone can still ninja loot with this change in place. They could honestly just like BS their way through it, saying like, oh, I don't know, it looks like the loot sharing is bugged or something because I can't trade it to you, or whatever. They can find some excuse. And so the result of something like that would be that whoever needs the piece of gear would, again, need to submit a ticket to a GM and try and resolve the problem. But if they follow through with it, like I'm sure they probably will, then we'll just have to deal with it. All right, so let's get into why I think WoW Classic is a timeless game. So of course, for one thing, the evidence is clear that people are already playing it a lot. You know, you got in private servers, even today, after all of this stuff has been announced for official servers, people are still playing on private servers because of the hype, and there's thousands of people online at once at any given time of the day. Nostalrius, of course, was the most popular of them, peaking at 800,000 registered accounts and being forced by Blizzard itself through a cease and desist to shut down. It really shows that people miss vanilla WoW and people want to continue playing it, which is insane. After 12 years of World of Warcraft evolving and really just the gaming community changing in its own way, people are still heavily invested in World of Warcraft Classic, as if they're like those people camping outside of stores waiting for the game to be released so they could get their hands on a copy. You know, people are really, really invested in this game, which is why it's so exciting that it's coming out for another iteration, because it allows for a whole new generation to try it out. And I've heard from countless players who have quit during any certain expansion like Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, whatever. They're all ready to come back and play this game. So that's the first thing that makes this timeless, is just the community itself. I think the second part of this being more notable is that classic vanilla WoW takes much more time than retail to pretty much just get anything done. If you want to get to 60, you first have to realize that it is an enormous journey. Starting from the character creation screen, you realize that this is your only chance you have to customize your character. You choose your class, you choose your race, you choose your character's appearance, hair color, hairstyle, whatever, and that's it. That's all you get. You get no other chances. Now, I don't know if Blizzard is going to intervene in any kind of way, like allowing for Battle.net payments to change the character's appearance or whatever. I hope that's not the case, but that's how it is in vanilla. You can't change after that. And so once you make that decision, you are forced to get to know your class, because if you take on too many mobs at once, you're killed. If you're on a very populated server, if you take on too little mobs, then you're risking having to wait for mobs to spawn again after they're killed by other players if you didn't first grab them yourself. You have to play with smarts. You have to know your class. I hear for the average player, it takes maybe a few months to get to 60, maybe even longer. It could take like 6 months, maybe even up to a year. You really have to invest upon the class that you choose. Now, of course, once you get to 60, then we deal with the end game. We're talking about Onyxia, Zul'Gurub, Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, AQ, and then of course Naxxramas. Progressing through these raids and getting the gear that you need for this can take a long time. And if you're not a really dedicated player, even being viable to enter a raid like Naxxramas takes a hell of a lot of time. The best of the best gear that you could have prior to Naxxramas was technically not good enough at the time. Many of those who actually contended for clearing the entire raid had to constantly farm for different consumables and find anything at their disposal that they could use to help them in the process. You needed 8 tanks. Almost 1/4 of your entire raid had to be tanks for the 4 horsemen fight. The YouTuber Hamsterwheel goes more in depth into this topic in his own video about this. I'll link below if you're interested in that. But yeah, guys, it took almost 3 months for the best guilds to clear this. So if you intend on being a casual player, or maybe playing a little bit more frequently than what you might consider to be casual, the idea of Naxxramas, clearing it for yourself, and then also the idea of getting full tier 3 is almost like an endless prospect. So it's one of those things where for you to actually feel like you've done everything you could for your character, you'd have to really, really invest so much time and effort into the game to make that happen. And that, to me, while some people might feel intimidated by that, I personally think that is what makes it really cool. That's, of course, not even to mention that you might make alts and things of that nature, but moving on. So kind of on a similar topic, I wanted to cover gear a little bit. I can't stress enough, and I know you guys know this, getting certain pieces of gear in vanilla WoW can feel so rewarding. Even greens or blues, just to even start, it just feels so good. You know, when you get your first blue from, let's say, Dead Mines or something like that, it's just the best feeling in the world. You really feel like your character is improving, and that's, of course, another thing that adds to the journey of leveling. You know, we talked about the community aspect. That ties in really well with the progression of your character as far as going into instances. Talking about going to Dead Mines, Scarlet Monastery, Stratholme, all the way down the line, and of course everything in between. So these kinds of instances wasn't just, of course, a matter of taking you away from questing, but of course they were also there, I think, to give your character better gear. Again, build those relationships with people, find your proper tank, find your right healer, find some good DPS to run with, whatever it might be, depending on your role, of course. I think all that kind of adds together and really makes the game experience quite fun when you're leveling. This is why people actually say that the meat and potatoes of the game isn't actually at the end game, but more so in the 1 to 60 experience, because really it can be a journey in and of itself for people. So Now, while you get a rewarding feeling from getting all this new gear and stuff, you also, I think, get a much more rewarding feeling from the things you buy post earning and saving a lot of gold from a lot of effort. Which is to say that you got to save up for a mount, you got to be aware of your class abilities and the fact that you have to go to trainers and flush out a lot of the gold that you have at your disposal. So you got to be smart with your gold. And so when you are, you, I think, get the same kind of rewarding feeling as you would with a whole new piece of gear. Then, of course, we get into PvP in regards to battlegrounds and, of course, world PvP. Now, in patch 1.12.1, which is where we're going to be left off in classic WoW, progression style, of course, they're going to release certain raids as time goes on. I think all of the battlegrounds will be out at once. I'm not entirely sure, but in any case, we'll have Warsong Gulch, Arathi Basin, and Alterac Valley. Alterac Valley being my favorite. The fact that you have a 40-man raid versus a 40-man raid with all the different NPCs that we're familiar with back then, being able to spawn the big world bosses that would fight by our side, and certain characters, if they weren't strong enough, they could kind of be on the side back at the home base, doing repeatable quests, kind of gaining resources and pushing for reinforcements and upgrades to ally guards and stuff like that. This was really cool to me. It made the battleground really interesting, but another really cool aspect about Alterac Valley was the fact that it just simply could last so long. You know, we don't have, you know, the whole reinforcement point system as there is, I believe, still in retail. I don't play retail right now, but I know from when I left back around, I guess, the beginning of Mists of Pandaria, this was still a thing that, you know, reinforcements kind of limited the time that Alterac Valley would last. So some games I've heard can go on for like as long as a week and maybe even more. People would go AFK overnight and just kind of wake up and continue the fight. You know, you had like your bottlenecked fights between the two giant raid groups in Alterac Valley, so that was really, really cool. Got to see what people are made of. And then Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin had their own flavors too. Warsong Gulch being probably the most played. Then we got World PvP with Torin Mill, Blackrock Mountain, raids on major cities, what you might consider like mini raids at Goldshire or the Crossroads. All these things in tandem, I think, made for a really, really fresh, cool experience. And there's so many cool things about the game that I think we're all looking forward to, and I can almost with complete confidence say that classic WoW is going to allow for active World of Warcraft to remain popular for much longer than it would have if they didn't release this. So start thinking about the class that best suits you, whip out those talent tree calculators, and I'll see you in summer 2019. Alright guys, peace.
I'm going to go out on a limb and just say that all of the dense sharpening stones that I've made for guildies thus far is going to propel us towards a brighter raid tonight.
That's the spirit, bro.